When my father remarried, I thought peace would finally find me. For years, I had learned to measure my tone, to breathe carefully around Evelyn's polished calm, to stay polite enough to survive. The night she called, her voice was honeyed and trembling, the kind that coats a blade. "Sweetheart, I need a favor," she said, but her words carried the weight of expectation, not request. She told me about her separation, about how the kids were struggling, about how my extra space could become a safe haven. I looked at the single chair by my window and wondered what she thought I owed her. When I told her I couldn't do it, there was silence, the kind that hums before a storm. And in that stillness, I realized I had just crossed a line I wasn't meant to touch. The next morning, my father called before I'd even had coffee. He didn't ask how I was settling in, only what I'd said to upset Evelyn. His voice was weary, worn smooth from years of keeping the peace. I told him I couldn't house 2 kids, that I needed space for myself. He sighed like someone rehearsing disappointment. "Family helps family," he murmured, as if the phrase alone absolved him. The guilt hit immediately, coiled and familiar. He wasn't angry. That made it worse, because his silence between words sounded like agreement, not with me, but with her. By evening, my phone was a chorus of opinions. Aunts, cousins, even people who'd ignored me for years, suddenly decided I was the villain in Evelyn's tragedy. Their messages were laced with concern that bit like acid. "She's struggling. You're so lucky to have your independence. Maybe you could help, just for a while." I stared at the words until they blurred. The apartment around me felt too quiet, too earned, too mine. Every message asked me to surrender a piece of it. I wanted to scream that peace was not selfishness, that survival didn't make me cruel. Instead, I turned off my phone and let the silence become my only ally. Saturday arrived with the sound of my door handle turning. I hadn't invited her. Evelyn stepped inside like she owned the air itself, arms full of grocery bags, perfume cutting through the stale apartment air. "Thought I'd stock your fridge," she said sweetly. I watched her rearrange shelves, fill my counter with her choices, her presence rewriting the space. She spoke as though we'd agreed, as though this was her victory lap. Every plastic bag crinkled like a boundary breaking. I didn't stop her. Not yet. Part of me wanted to see just how far she'd go before she realized I was done being obedient. Dinner wasn't planned. It happened because she wouldn't leave. She cooked like it was her kitchen, talking through every bite about her problems, about Liam's grades, Sophie's sleepless nights, the unfairness of rent, the heartbreak of doing it all alone. Her words wrapped around me like barbed wire disguised as sympathy. "You're so grounded, Mara," she said. "You could give them what I can't right now." I realized then. To her, I wasn't family. I was a resource. When I told her again, quietly but firmly, that my apartment wasn't theirs to share, her eyes narrowed. Not with rage, but with strategy. That expression chilled me more than shouting ever could. The next week unfolded like a slow siege. Evelyn didn't argue anymore. She performed. Family calls arrived daily, each wrapped in concern but lined with quiet accusation. I heard her words in their mouths. "She's overwhelmed. She's just asking for help. You know how hard it is to raise 2 kids alone." Every message felt rehearsed. My father said little, but I knew his silence was permission. I tried to drown the noise with work, with the rhythm of solitude, but guilt seeped through the cracks like smoke. I wasn't heartless. I was just tired of being drafted into someone else's crisis. Yet, the more I held my ground, the more they painted me as the enemy. It was Aunt Jo who finally called, not to scold, but to warn. "She's talking," she said flatly, "painting you as ungrateful. You need to protect your story before she writes it for you." Jo's voice carried that blunt honesty that once scared me but now felt like mercy. I told her I didn't want a war. She laughed, dry and sharp. You're already in one, sweetheart. You just don't realize she started it. The moment you said no. The truth landed heavy. I looked around my tiny apartment, the one I thought meant freedom, and saw the battlefield it had become. Sunday dinner was supposed to be neutral ground, but Evelyn turned it into theater. She spoke softly, letting tears glisten at perfect moments, describing how hard it was, doing it all alone. How some people couldn't understand. The table was full of nodding heads, sympathetic sighs, and unspoken judgment aimed squarely at me. I said nothing. Let them fill the silence. Her story was flawless, practiced to the breath. But when I looked at her, really looked, I saw calculation behind every tear. And I wondered how long she'd been perfecting this role before the curtain ever rose. After dinner, Liam cornered me in the hallway. His voice was small, hesitant. Mom says you don't like us anymore. I froze. He didn't know he was being used. His little sister peeked from behind him, her curls half hidden in the doorway. I crouched, choosing my words carefully. It's not that I don't like you, I said. I just can't fix everything. His eyes dimmed, confusion settling where trust should be. Watching him retreat to his mother's side, I realized Evelyn had found her most powerful weapon, innocence, and she wielded it without hesitation. Ancestral curl. That night I couldn't sleep. Every message, every look, every word replayed like echoes in an empty church. I wasn't just fighting Evelyn. I was fighting the version of myself they preferred. Compliant, useful. I wanted to believe that standing firm was strength, but it felt more like loneliness. Still, there was something sacred about the silence in my apartment, the way it belonged only to me. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, knowing the next move was hers. And when she made it, she wouldn't call first. She'd just arrived. I came home to find the door unlocked. For 1 second, I thought I'd imagined it, until I stepped inside and saw them. Liam's shoes by the door, Sophie's backpack on the floor, and Evelyn standing in my kitchen like she'd never left. Just for a few nights, she said, her tone already daring me to object. I felt the world narrow to the sound of my heartbeat, my space, my boundary, my one fragile piece of peace, invaded without permission. She called it family. I called it trespass. But she was already unpacking the kids' clothes before I could form the word leave. The apartment changed overnight. Laughter replaced silence. Toys replaced calm. I didn't blame the kids. They were just following her lead. Evelyn moved through my home like a director on her own stage, assigning rooms, routines, reasons. You'll see, she said. It'll be good for you. She turned my independence into an experiment in obedience. Every time I opened my mouth to protest, she smiled like she'd won before I'd started. The walls of my apartment seemed to shrink, not from space, but from ownership. I had built a home, and she was turning it into her next performance venue. That evening, I sat with Sophie while she drew quietly at the table. She told me she missed how Dad used to laugh before Mom started crying all the time. Her voice was calm, too calm for someone her age. I wanted to hug her, to promise everything would be okay, but I knew better than to make promises I couldn't keep. Behind us, Evelyn was on the phone, crying just loud enough for the sound to carry. I didn't need to hear the words to know the story she was selling. The image of her fragility was perfect, and I was her convenient villain. By midweek, Aunt Jo showed up unannounced, eyes sharp as knives. You've got to stop letting her script this, she said, looking around at the chaos. She's using your silence as proof. Jo didn't wait for permission. She spoke truth like a weapon. She's been telling people you're unstable, that you invited her, then changed your mind. Half the family believes her. My stomach dropped. I realized Evelyn wasn't just stealing space. She was rewriting history in real time. Jo's gaze softened. You can't win her game by being polite, she said. You win by pulling the curtain down. That night, I found Evelyn at the kitchen table, wine glass half full, phone lighting her face. "You shouldn't talk to Joe," she said, voice soft but edged like glass. "She loves to twist things." She didn't look at me, just swirled the wine. "You've always been dramatic, Mara. You make everything so hard." My breath caught, not from fear, but clarity. She wasn't unraveling. She was controlling the narrative. I realized then, every tear, every plea, every whisper was a move in her quiet war. I stood there, silent, and in that silence, something in me hardened. I wasn't going to yield anymore. Morning came with the scent of coffee and deceit. Evelyn acted as if the night before had never happened. She hummed while packing lunches, her every movement choreographed, her every smile too precise. The children followed her rhythm, unknowing performers in her charade. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, realizing that nothing she did was accidental. Not the vulnerability, not the control. When she turned to hand me a mug, her eyes met mine, and I caught the flicker of something colder than anger. Calculation. That's when I knew. She wasn't surviving, she was winning. And I was done playing by her script. I started small, checking details, receipts, stories that didn't line up. Evelyn's version of events was full of gaps if you listened closely enough. Aunt Jo helped quietly, asking questions at family dinners, planting seeds of doubt where Evelyn's confidence once bloomed. And then one afternoon, Jo called. "You were right," she said. "She's not just broke, she's been hiding money. Your father's money." I felt my chest tighten. Evelyn's struggles weren't about survival, they were about control. Control she'd bought with the sympathy of others and the silence of my father. That evening I confronted my father. He looked smaller than I remembered, as though guilt had carved him into something softer, weaker. When I showed him the proof, the hidden accounts, the withdrawals, he didn't deny it. He just sighed, long and tired. "She said she needed it for the kids," he whispered. I wanted to shout, but all I felt was grief, not for the money, but for the years he'd let her steer his choices. "You let her lie," I said. "You let her use us." He nodded, eyes glossy, and for once there was no defense left in him, only regret. I returned home before sunset. Evelyn was there as if she'd known I'd be. "You've been digging," she said softly. No greeting, no pretense. Her calm terrified me more than any outburst could. I told her I knew everything, about the money, the lies, the manipulation. She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, slow and almost tender. "Do you really think they'll believe you over me?" she asked. The words were sharp, but beneath them was fear. I could hear it, faint but real. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control, and she knew it. That night, Aunt Jo gathered the family on a video call. I stayed silent as she spoke, laying out every detail, the missing funds, the false stories, the manipulation. Evelyn tried to interrupt, voice cracking under the weight of exposure. But Jo had proof, and the silence that followed was the sound of illusion breaking. My father looked hollow on the screen, the truth burning away what was left of denial. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't need to defend myself. The truth was doing it for me. Evelyn closed her laptop first. The screen went black, and peace, real peace, filled the space she left behind. The morning after the call, silence settled like dust after a demolition. Evelyn was gone, her things removed, her name erased from the group chat, her carefully constructed version of events unraveling in whispers. I made coffee without shaking for the first time in months. The kids stayed with their father, and though guilt tugged at me, it was quieter now. Honest, not imposed. My phone buzzed with messages, some apologetic, others cautious. I didn't respond. I'd learned that peace wasn't granted by family consensus, it was claimed. And mine had been hard-earned. My father called that afternoon. His voice was rough, stripped of authority. I didn't see it, he said. Or maybe I didn't want to. I told him I understood, but understanding didn't erase the hurt. There was a long pause, the kind filled with everything neither of us knew how to say. "You were right to stand your ground," he whispered. That small confession felt heavier than an apology. For years, I'd waited for his validation. Now, I realized I didn't need it. But it still meant everything to hear. A week later, I met Liam and Sophie at the park. They ran toward me, hesitant at first, then smiling. Evelyn had told them she needed space, a rare truth from her lips. We sat on the grass, the autumn wind gentle, their laughter cautious but real. Liam showed me a drawing he'd made of my apartment. He called it Mara's quiet house. I didn't know how to tell him that quiet wasn't loneliness. It was healing. So I just hugged him and let the moment be simple. For once, it didn't feel like choosing sides. It felt like reclaiming family on my own terms. News spread slowly through the family. Evelyn had left town, supposedly to start over. Some pitied her. Others pretended they'd never taken her side. I didn't correct them. The truth didn't need my defense anymore. Aunt Jo came by with wine and a smirk. "You burned it all down, kid," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "And look, you're still standing." I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Not the polite, careful kind, but the kind that comes from a chest no longer caged by guilt. Late that night, I stood by the window. The city lights scattered below like constellations of my new life. My apartment was finally mine again. Not a battleground, not a burden, just a place where I could exist without justification. I thought of Evelyn, of how control had always been her language, and how silence had finally answered her louder than rage ever could. I wasn't proud of the war we'd fought, but I was proud of surviving it with my integrity intact. In the end, peace didn't look like victory. It looked like breathing without permission. The days began to fall into rhythm again. I woke when the light crept across my floorboards, brewed coffee without dread, opened windows without expecting someone else's noise. The quiet had texture now, soft, full, forgiving. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before Evelyn moved in. The strokes felt hesitant at first, like testing the strength of new wings. But as color filled the canvas, I felt the return of something I'd forgotten. Ownership of my own feeling wasn't cinematic. It was slow, repetitive, ordinary. And that ordinariness felt like freedom. Aunt Jo called every few days, sometimes to check in, sometimes just to sit in silence on the line. "You sound lighter," she said once, her voice amused. I smiled. Maybe I finally stopped mistaking endurance for kindness. She laughed, and in that sound was the echo of family rebuilt on honesty, not obligation. The weight that once anchored me had shifted. I could breathe without guilt, love without surrendering ground. Joe's voice softened before hanging up. "Don't disappear now that you're free, kid. Freedom's only worth it if you live in it." Work began to feel different too. I stopped apologizing for existing in meetings, stopped softening my ideas to keep the peace. People noticed, though not everyone understood. One coworker asked what had changed. I just said, "I stopped letting guilt pay my rent." They laughed, but I meant it. Every piece of my life that used to feel borrowed now felt earned. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting to someone else's chaos. I was creating something of my own. When Liam and Sophie visited again, they didn't ask about their mother. We baked cookies, made a mess, and laughed until the kitchen smelled like sugar and second chances. Sophie drew a picture of us. 3 figures smiling beneath a sky full of uneven stars. She wrote, "Home," across the top. I didn't correct her. Maybe home wasn't a place you inherited. Maybe it was something you built, piece by piece, every time you chose peace over permission. For once, I wasn't afraid to let them stay a little longer. That night, as the kids slept on the couch, I sat by the window and looked out at the city. My reflection was softer now, not haunted, just human. I realized that healing hadn't made me invincible. It had made me present. The chaos that once defined me was gone, replaced by something quieter but stronger. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. The scars of that year were still there, but they had shape, purpose, meaning. I whispered to my reflection, half a prayer, half a promise. This is mine, all of it. It had been months since I last heard her voice. When Evelyn called, I almost didn't answer, but curiosity is a stubborn ghost. Her tone was brittle, thinner than I remembered. "I wanted to apologize," she said, but her words felt rehearsed, still balancing on pride. She spoke of therapy, of rebuilding, of how the kids missed me. I listened, not out of obligation, but closure. There was a time her voice could pull me back into her orbit. Not anymore. When she asked if we could start over, I said gently, "You can." "I already have." For once, she didn't reply. The silence wasn't war. It was peace, finally agreed upon. After that call, I walked through the city. The air had the chill of approaching rain, and the streets shimmered with reflected light. For the first time, I felt the world expand around me, instead of closing in. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was walking towards something I hadn't yet named. Every stranger's face, every sound of life around me, reminded me that survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it just looks like walking without fear. Weeks later, my father stopped by. He brought a small box. Inside, a photo of all of us from years ago, before the fractures, before the silence. He said softly. I studied the picture, noticing how tense my smile looked even then. He looked older now, but lighter too, as if the truth had cost him something but given him back more. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The past wasn't fixed, but it was finally still. And that was enough. That night, I looked around my apartment. The space that had seen me at my smallest and my strongest. Every mark on the wall, every shadow, every echo carried a memory. I thought about the version of myself who once believed saying no made her cruel. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. The people who love you will learn to meet you where you stand. The ones who don't will call it defiance. Either way, you'll survive. And survival, I realized, was its own kind of grace. The story doesn't end with forgiveness or revenge. It ends with ownership. My home, my voice, my boundaries, they finally belong to me. Evelyn will tell her version to whoever still listens. I no longer need to correct her. The truth is self-sustaining now. Some days I still hear echoes of that old guilt, but they fade quickly, replaced by the hum of my own life continuing. When I lock my door at night, it's not to keep anyone out. It's to remind myself that what's inside is finally mine.